In 1988, at the request of Arnold Schwarzenegger, Carolco bought the script for $3 million from the bankrupt studio of Dino De Laurentiis. Schwarzenegger got the lead role and personally invited Paul Verhoeven to direct.
An evil empire created on Mars forces humans to work for oxygen.
We suddenly realized that we would have to use material that was completely unsuitable for rotoscoping.
Such stunning visuals and special effects I've never seen before.
I'd say, Arnold, we've done 20 takes, but it's not the same. And he'd say, Paul, keep going.
Right now we find out if there is life on Mars. Schizoid embolism, is it painful or untreatable? Who was rotoscoped, where rirprojection was inserted, and why one head is mechanical and the other talking.
Get ready for a surprise!
Paul Verhoeven received a 40-second version of the script, but it still had to be significantly revised. In order to optimize production costs, the film crew went to Mexico City, sunny Mexican capital with its bright billboards and futuristic architecture perfectly suited to the role of the land of the future, except that the signs on the streets and in the metro were replaced and the cars were repainted from orange to silver.
We went to Mexico, and it was a great choice because the architecture in Mexico City is unlike anything else around.
We found some unusual neo-brutalist architecture. It was very dark, heavy massive buildings in concrete blocks, giving the film a very unusual, futuristic atmosphere. The film already had a full storyboard. And the whole production was based on that, so it's very restrictive. I mean, when everything is already thought out in advance, you can't go beyond the budget and change anything much. You have to realize that static shots have a price, and if I moved the camera like this or like this, the price would go up, and if I had moved the camera like this, it would have cost a lot more. I tried very hard and added interesting moments in different scenes. For example, when a girl just paints her nails and they suddenly change color, or when the walls in a building, the walls in a room suddenly turn into a living photo wallpaper or a huge TV. We came up with all these techniques when we were finalizing the script. It's important to show reality as if it were not really reality. First the wall is a wall, and then there's a landscape. The fingernails are green at first, and then suddenly they're red, and so on. We really tried to convince the audience and make their brain believe it, so that when I show them that the dream is actually reality or vice versa, they would believe me.
Mars' mountainous landscape, mines and reactor were designed and assembled at Dream Quest Studios in California. The amount of work was so large that the designers literally had no place to turn. For help they turned to the specialists of the then young company, Stetson Visual Services, and those, having realized the scale of the project, immediately rented a hangar of almost 2,000 square meters, and the work boiled over. Builders, artists, designers and decorators worked tirelessly, without weekends, 7 days a week. All in all, nearly 50 sets of various sizes were assembled. Models of the Martian metropolis were used as a background. Through chroma key, a little coloring, and it was done. Pay attention, this is not some static background, this is a real, live, fantastic city, Venusville. Such depth and realism of the picture was achieved through attention to detail, working with light and optical effects. Director of photography Alex Funk and visual effects supervisor Eric Brevig provided many nuances, such as moving objects, flashing lights, and even a cloud shadow created by a moving shadow grid stretched over the mock-up. We also used matte painting, the so-called additional drawing, as well as RIR and front projection.
We took a small device, a miniature projector for rear projection. We used it on the layouts in the film, The Abyss, and here we installed it inside the model of the carriage. And it turned out as if Arnold was looking out of the train window. At that moment, the camera pulls back and the scenery is spectacular, but it was just a rear projection. The piece with Arnold that Eric Brevig brought back from Mexico was projected onto a small screen about this size inside the carriage of this train. And then, there's a seamless transition to the big picture, and it looks cool. Eric Brevig came up with another interesting thing. At the end of the film, after the mountain explodes and the atmosphere builds, that moment, where the mutants, the inhabitants of the city, come out, and look around, and the camera pulls back, and we see the beautiful mountainous landscape of the planet. Eric made a front projection of these mutants on a small curved screen like this one. It was built right into the layout at that very spot. The camera pulls back to the general background, and it's not noticeable that there was a front projection. In my opinion, it turned out perfectly.
When it came to the reactor, the studio became the largest consumer of liquid nitrogen in Los Angeles. A construction of illuminated tubes was lowered into a tank of liquid nitrogen and shot at 128 frames per second. Nitrogen is consumed very quickly. Every day brought new cylinders, which were barely enough for a few minutes of shooting. Explosions in pyramidal mines and terraforming of Mars were filmed on a mock-up more than 9 meters high. A lot of pyrotechnics and smoke machines were used.
We made models of Mars, the red planet. Everything is red, bright red, beautiful. We just sprinkled red plaster over the models. It would have been okay, but when we finished, that red powder was everywhere. Everyone got really dirty, but we tried really hard. As soon as Alex Funk finished shooting, the mock-ups were broken up, leaving them outside. And at the very end, when all the mock-ups were broken, we had a party. A big forklift truck would come up, lift them high and throw them on the ground, creating big clouds of red dust.
While the guys were having fun with their models, the film crew in Mexico managed to survive fever, nausea, dehydration, food poisoning and diarrhea. The Iron Arnie suffered the least, having learnt from bitter experience on the set of Predator. This time he took his personal chef and a supply of drinking water with him to Mexico.
Arnold is not Laurence Olivier, he's not that experienced an actor yet, charisma is his speciality. If you ask him to just look at the camera like that, like I'm doing right now, he can express 10 times more emotion than I can, you know. There's something about him, that face. It's like his face is molded, and it's got such an unusual shape. These blue eyes and a very expressive, powerful look. If you just take a close-up of Arnold's face, it's interesting to look at. He doesn't even have to act, he just has to be in the frame, that's all great. But I had to spend a lot of time trying to get real acting and change that robot voice from him. I did a lot of takes with him. Sometimes 20, 30, 40 takes. I was sure I could get a better performance. It's quite funny. But Arnold thought the same thing. I'd say, Arnold, we've done 20 takes, but it's all wrong. And he'd say, Paul, keep going, we do another take, another take, another take, another take, another take. Until I'm like, okay, that's it. And he'd say, let's keep going. Arnold was convinced that I could solve any problem. He trusted me completely. Arnold was the most dedicated and involved actor I've ever had in my career. For him, film was everything. He's not like, I want this, I want that, I want that. It's like, you need this. I'm gonna make sure you get it. That's his approach.
Remember Everything could be safely called a sci-fi blockbuster without computer special effects, if it weren't for this X-ray scanner. Oh, how much trouble the guys from MetroLight Studios had with it. Oh, how much trouble. First, Schwarzenegger refused to wear a special black suit and sent the programmers to his customer. Then the mocap let them down. The motion capture technology was not so perfect back then. Although they had high hopes for it, the software could not correctly recognize the movements of the light sensors. They were too small and overlapped each other.
We suddenly realized we'd have to use material that was completely unsuitable for rotoscoping, and you know, it's great that Arnie came in that white suit, because from that we were able to pick out his silhouette, draw all his limbs with the rotoscope, and animate a computerized model of the skeleton, based on his actual movements. If Arnie had dressed in black that day, like we asked, it would have been much more difficult, or it wouldn't have worked at all, so thank God the costume designer didn't listen to us and Arnie didn't change his clothes.
Arnold was lucky, of course, but the rest of the cast was animated manually, frame by frame, visually checking with the footage, model of human skeleton digitized on 3D digitizer, and for the dog borrowed the skeleton of a wolf in the art museum. In addition to the popular package for working with 3D graphics alias Power Animator on the Silicon Graphics platform, the guys used their own renderer and software for compositing. The animation of the models was brought to perfection. All that was left was a final composite on film with a certain level of transparency. At the time, this was a complex optical compositing process that could not allow the negatives to become damaged or dust to get on them. MetroLight Studios, realizing how serious and large a project this was, persuaded the producers to shell out another $6,000 for a quality final composite copy. As always, Schwarzenegger had understudies, Joel Kramer, Peter Kent, and animatronic puppets, one for the creepy shots with bulging eyes, another for the scene where Quaid takes the radio bug out of his nose, and of course, the unforgettable full-size mechanical head with a surprise.
My mechanical thing appears in the film when Arnold disguises himself as some fat chick. I don't know who she is, or what her name is. When the chick just starts shaking, you see a live actress, and then we change the head, and you see a completely robotic replica of this woman's head. She starts to shake violently, her eyes run back and forth. In short, she behaves very strangely. Then this thing comes out of her ear, like a cartridge or something, and there's a completely different head. In the frame, head number 2. Head number 3 is the first head, which now comes out in pieces. There it is, standing behind me. It's taken many months to build all these mechanics. There's bearings and hinges and stuff like that, which is the precision mechanism that opens the mask. It rises hydraulically right above Arnold. The sort of thing you use to lift a car in a garage because it's heavy. Even Arnold can't lift it. Anyway, after all this, when the real Arnold appears, we see him in the frame with another head in his hands. He holds this head, and in the next shot, he just throws it at the camera. The guys catch it, and the camera at that very moment shoots from the shoulder, and we see the head start talking. This is a real live actress, only here she looks bald, and her head is separated from her body by a mask, and through rotoscoping is combined with another background. It appears as if her head is speaking on its own. But it's just an illusion based on a certain combination of special makeup and optical effects. And then she blows up, and it's a completely different head.
Get ready for a surprise!
That's how we use different special effects, optical, computer, makeup, anything at all.
Rob Bottin, the master of animatronics and plastic makeup, showed what he can do in the first RoboCop, and this time Paul Verhoeven gave him much more creative freedom. Rob turned men, women, and children into Martian mutants, and made actress Licia Nuff into a TRHGRDYPRST took a Mary. She's just wearing a superimposed artificial bust made of a foam prosthesis with water inside. Although it looks quite appetizing, Mary was even going to be a quadruple-breasted Mary, but they changed their minds because it would have turned out to be a Martian fat cow without a hint of SCK-ness. The robot taxi driver Johnny Cab, created in the image and likeness of actor Robert Picardo, was supposed to be much more alive, much more dynamic, to open his mouth wider and move his lips, but the servos responsible for articulation didn't work. The master mechanic stayed up for 4 days trying to adjust the mechanisms, but nothing worked. He almost ended up in hospital and was reprimanded, and Johnny was still filming, barely twitching his jaws. Siamese twin mutant Quato, played by Marshall Bell, was so convincing that the uninitiated took him for a live. Quato's freak was a true work of art, controlled by 15 puppeteers. In reality, they just worked 3 shifts, and here's the gaff. Quaid was spotted on the scanner with a gun in his waistband. But just a minute ago, he hid it under his jacket. It must have slipped down like the bandage in that joke.
When we were doing Remember Everything, just as we were building the last layout for the final scene, where there's a big canyon and the camera pans out, and the people come out after Mars fills with atmosphere. If you look closely, in the scene where Arnold is standing, Schwarzenegger and kisses Rachel Tickerton when she says, "Kiss me before you wake up." Behind them is a gorgeous view of a completely revamped Mars. Take a closer look, and you'll see there's a can of Coca-Cola, painted gray. I just stuck it in there, I thought. Is this going to work? And it did.
Remember Everything was released in 1990 and immediately collected a good box office, and all because Arnold was in time and took care of the advertising campaign, forcing the producers to completely remount the trailer. A year later, in 1991, Terminator 2, Judgment Day, will be released and will forever inscribe Schwarzenegger's name among the most expensive and iconic actors in Hollywood. Verhoeven's groundbreaking film is entertaining, atmospheric, technically perfect, interesting, dynamic, visually beautiful and timeless. At the same time, it doesn't try to be gravely serious and is a vanishing breed of intelligent and moderately entertaining and mischievous cinema. Paul Verhoeven has made not just a very high-quality sci-fi, non-stop action film, but also one of the brightest and best films on the subject of adventurous interplanetary travel, especially concerning travel to Mars.
Comrades. All of you are interested in the question, is there life on Mars? Is there life on Mars? Is there no life on Mars? This science does not know, science is not yet in the know, ha ha ha.